Today we have with us Guy Mcpherson. Guy Mcpherson, welcome to our show here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah, it seems like we have a common friend too, Peter Melton.
Yes, that's correct. A recent friend of mine.
Yeah, he's a pretty good guy. He's used to live up here in Chico. I think he's down in Santa Rosa now or Santa Cruz.
Vicinity of Santa Cruz, anyway. Yes,
Yep.
that's where I met him.
So there's a lot that we would like to get into today, and I've listened to a lot of your lectures and talks, and you cover it pretty good. And I want you to know, before we even get started, our demographics, the people that watch our YouTubes and read our magazine, they're a little smarter than the average person, and I would say that they're realist. Every once in a while, I'll get a quote unquote a spiritual person telling me I'm being too negative. And for me, that's like being on the Titanic and you're trying to tell them that it's sinking. You're not being negative. You're just being real and taking advantage of every opportunity that's at your disposal to survive, really. So I'm right on board with you with what you're talking about. But I really like the humanity of what you're talking about, because at the end of the day, that might be all we have. And like you said, I heard you talking on RT News. Even if all of this is wrong, the projections, it just ends up being nothing. It would be a much better world if we just simply treat each other better. But let's get into some of the foundations in projections. I know the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change recently came out with some statistics. Would you like to start there?
Sure. The IPCC, in their fifth assessment, which was scheduled for release this year, but which was heavily leaked. The first working group's assessment was leaked in September of last year. And there are a couple of significant conclusions from that. And first, this is a headline from Truthout in late April of this year. So about a month ago, the headline at Truthout says, quote, "Intergovernmental Climate Report leaves hopes hanging on fantasy technology." And the conclusion of the IPCC in their fifth assessment is that global warming is irreversible without massive geoengineering of the atmosphere's chemistry. That's a rather significant step for one of the most conservative scientific bodies on the planet to say that we have crossed the point of no return in the absence of geoengineering. Subsequently, there have been several reports that have come out, 5 by my count, that indicate in general that current proposals for geoengineering are likely to either be relatively useless or actually make things worse. So that leads directly to Truthout's headline about fantasy technology. The IPCC thinks things have gone so far that we need to throw some sort of techno fix at it, but everything that's thought of so far appears to be unworkable.
It's especially unworkable if you're in the area that is the focus of a lot of this engineering, like Northern California. Dane from Geoengineering Watch keeps me abreast of what's happening with the chemtrails and everything. And all you have to do is look outside and look up. And what concerns me is a lot of people, it seems like the idea of normalization comes in. Because I talk to people now and they're already getting used to, oh yeah, the chemtrails, yeah, it's pretty bad today. It's bad every day. And this is tons and tons of heavy metals they're dropping on us. So I think to myself, okay, if it's true, if the government is actually being truthful with us for the first time in history, and they're actually doing this for our benefit and to try to save the planet, we're in really bad shape if they're doing all this for that reason. But if it's a cover-up for something even deeper, that even has me even more worried. But either way, I think we're in a really bad fix here with the geoengineering, because that alone, if nothing else was happening, I think that is going to destroy everything from the air currents to the soil quality, air quality, water quality.
Well, I would argue that we've been doing geoengineering since at least the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Every time you turn on your ignition on your automobile, you're geoengineering. We're carrying out this massive experiment with the chemistry of the Earth's atmosphere, and we've been carrying that out for a long time. Clive Hamilton, in his latest book, Earth Masters, which came out in April of 2013, did an analysis of the sulfates. Industrial activity constantly puts sulfates into the air, into the atmosphere, and they're constantly falling out too, of course. What he points out is that when industrial activity stops, and within a few days all those sulfates fall out of the air, we'll heat the planet by an additional 1.1 degrees centigrade over the current 0.85 degrees centigrade. So that takes us to 1.95, or we'll just round it and say 2. 2 is the political target. It's never been a scientific target. It's a political target. And it appears that even collapse of industrial civilization leads directly to 2C and the horrors attendant with that. So it's pretty obvious at this point that even with collapse, we're damned if we do and damned if we don't.
Yeah, it does seem like that we're definitely into the sixth greatest extinction event in history. And it's exponentially, which is another interesting term because we are such linear thinkers. I'm not sure we can wrap our mind around the prognosing our future exponentially. It's hard to do that for our minds.
Yes, absolutely. You talked about normalcy bias earlier, and that's exactly what we do, and what evolution by natural selection has genetically programmed us to do is consider what has happened in the relatively recent past, that is within our lifetimes, and project that in a linear fashion forward. And so we're ill-equipped to deal with exponential change at a very fundamental level, even though we observe exponential changes quite commonly now at a large scale. So we see things like exponential growth of the human population and exponential growth of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and exponential growth of extinction of non-human species, now progressing at the rate of some 200 species a day, and so on. So we have this concept that we're exposed to pretty regularly, but it doesn't match with our evolutionary experience and with our personal experience. So it's pretty difficult to wrap our minds around that.
So what do you think about the self-reinforcing feedback loops? Dane was telling me there's at least 28, maybe 30 of them that's in process right now. Everything from the tundra to the climate.
Yes, I keep pretty close track of those on my website, Nature Bats Last, and by my count, we're up to 36 of those now, of which 33 appear to be irreversible at temporal spans relevant to the human experience. The first of those is the firing of the clathrate gun, or the methane bomb, in the Arctic, by which methane hydrates or clathrates bubble up out of the shallow floor of the Arctic Ocean and release the methane directly into the atmosphere. That's the one that appears to be the most dire. That's the one James Hansen worried about in his book Storms of My Grandchildren. And it appears that indeed we have fired the clathrate gun as of about 7 years ago.
And this is when they're concerned about what they're calling the burp.
Yes. According to the authors of a paper in Nature in July 2013, a 50 gigaton burp of methane is highly possible at any time. That's equivalent to more than 1,000 gigatons of carbon. And so far in our history, we burn less than 1/3 that amount of carbon by burning fossil fuels. So we're talking about 3 times the equivalent of carbon dioxide being released, highly possible at any time. So that burp could happen literally any time. It could happen when the Arctic sea ice is reduced to such an extent that additional feedback from warm water allows a sudden burp or emission of methane from the Arctic.
Yeah.
That really is very terrifying.
And this is a good example, too, of a feedback loop, not only being self-reinforcing, but bleeding over into other feedback loops.
That's right. These feedback loops reinforce within themselves, and they reinforce among themselves as too. So, for example, this methane release from the shallow seabed in the Arctic, well, that's one thing, big deal. But it's reinforced by warm Atlantic water shooting through the Fram Strait off the north and east coast of Greenland. Warm Atlantic water going straight into the Arctic instead of reversing course as part of the thermohaline conveyor belt. That was reported in Science in January 2011. And so we have these things feeding among themselves as well as within themselves, and that doesn't bode well either.
Yeah, it seems like I was watching some of what Paul Beckwith is talking about in some of the global maps, and it appears like we have a really large hotspot in the upper Siberian area that's pushing the normal trade winds up higher and higher up into Alaska. So California is missing a lot of what we would have normal precipitation is being pushed further and further north.
That's right. A couple of points about that. That's also reinforced by methane coming out of permafrost. As permafrost decomposes, it releases methane into the atmosphere. And so it was initially reported in Siberia, but now is reported throughout the boreal forests of the northern hemisphere that there are these methane vents coming out of former permafrost, now permamelt. And in 2010, when those were reported in the reference journal literature in the journal Tellus, in 2010, researchers documented vents about a foot across, about 30 centimeters across. Well, by summer 2011, they were up to a kilometer across. And so that's a profound change in a short period of time. That's the kind of rapid, unpredictable, and nonlinear responses the United Nations Advisory Group on has warned us about in 1990, 24 years ago. Second significant point about precipitation in California, I think you're about to see a reprieve. It appears that there's about a 70% chance or so that there will be an El Nino starting this fall, and that should bring abundant winter rain to California. It also apparently will increase global average temperature by about 1.25 degrees centigrade all by itself. And so that too takes us over the 2-degree tipping point. So that's it appears to be an even larger El Nino than 1998, which is the year the climate deniers point to as the year the plateau began in global average surface temperatures. Well, it's easy to point to that year because we had a big El Nino that year. So suddenly we had a lot of heat released by the ocean, and
Right.
So our land temperature records picked that up.
So it appears like we're thinking about moving into the southern hemisphere at some point. And so I've been looking into how it is down there, and it appears like there is a lot of heat still going into the southern hemisphere, but it's being blocked by the wind vents down there, the wind currents. And that's what's causing the Antarctic ice to actually expand on top. And it's catching the heat, and it's right at the tip of Brazil, or right at the tip of South America, Africa, and Australia. They're getting extreme heat, but there seems to be a band around the southern hemisphere that's fairly stable.
Well, there's Antarctic ice volume is actually decreasing and has been declining since at least 2003. Loss of sea ice in Antarctica during the last 3 years, 2010 to 2013, was double that during 2005 to 2010. So the Antarctic is actually losing about 160 billion metric tons per year. So yes, I absolutely believe that there will be habitat for humans far longer in the southern hemisphere than in the northern hemisphere. But the Antarctic is losing ice as well.
Yeah.
And there is a pretty clear separation in general atmospheric patterns between the northern and southern hemispheres, which, along with the relative lack of methane in the southern hemisphere and the large water to land ratio in the southern hemisphere compared to the northern hemisphere. All that stacks up in favor of habitat lasting longer for humans in the southern hemisphere than in the northern hemisphere.
Yeah, and not to sound too conspiratorial, I started looking into who is buying land in especially South America, and it's the people we would call the elites, the really wealthy business people. They're all buying land down there, and they're trying to buy the headwaters, like the three major water companies like Nestle's. They're trying to buy headwaters, but there's a big people down there just aren't going for it. Like in Bolivia, they kicked out the privatization of water. And so there's a little more consciousness about how important the water is. But it seems like the people that really do know, they're heading south. In Mother Jones, this last issue this whole article is about going south. And Chile is pretty popular, although they're getting a lot of heat on the coast. Ecuador has a lot of American colonies. And Brazil, since Brazil is tuning into the BRIC, with Brazil, Russia, and China, they're pretty much taking the reserve currency out of the basket so they can do business directly with their own dollars. So seems like people are getting prepared for this.
Yes, people who have traded on information to make their fortunes are well aware of what's going on. And so James Cameron, who just has this new series out, The Years of Living Dangerously, in which he's describing climate change that's underway, has recently purchased a significant portion of the North Island in New Zealand. There's a well-known public figure who is quite wealthy, who contacted me about a year and a half ago and wanted to visit my homestead here, and is preparing to move to Australia because he knows.
Right.
And he follows my writing primarily on the climate change front, and so that's the sort of typical sociopathic response I've come to expect from those who have a lot of money based on knowledge. Is they're not telling us any of this information. This public figure I mentioned is really well known. He's interviewed many times every week. He never mentions climate change. He talks about financial issues as he's preparing to make his escape.
Right. Yeah, I have a friend that's pretty well known, and he's a microbiologist, and he won't get into this either, but he bought land in New Zealand. And but now here more and more, I do hear people talking about this, and they normally would never even talk about this, but this is becoming more and more into the collective consciousness now, which I think is important for reasons why we're doing this.
Yes, I mean, we've known about climate change for quite a long time, and it's been in the news for a while, but this notion of abrupt climate change has only relatively recently entered the conversation. And so that is starting to attract a lot more interest within the last year or so, I would say, than it had before then.
So, Guy, I'm going to put a lot of links up to some of your other talks with you have so much left brain information out there that's really good, really important. But I'd sort of like to get into the up close and personal part about this, because I know you have a place where in New Mexico.
Yes, yeah. Southern New Mexico.
Now, do you still feel that that's going to be a viable, sustainable place for you, or how is that working?
No, I haven't felt that way for about a year.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I moved here was to develop homestead service for myself, my small family, and also for the family my wife and I share this property with. But in light of economic collapse. But we've recently learned meaning about 13 months ago with Clive Hamilton's book Earthmasters, that collapse leads to sudden catastrophic warming that will make this place unviable for humans in the very near term after economic collapse. So, of course, this is, if you want to put an X on the first place to lose human habitat when collapse is complete, this would be the spot.
Yeah, when you start looking at the global maps where the methane expulsion is, then realize that almost all of the industry, the land mass, the population, almost everything up here that's causing this is in the northern hemisphere. You start realizing, okay, I think in the future, assuming that there will be a future, in the future we will look back and recognize that there was a mass exodus of people coming from the northern hemisphere south. And I think that's where we're going to end up on this planet, to see if we can wait out a lot of what's going on.
Yeah, and I disagree from only a minor perspective. I don't think it'll be a major exodus because the information is so well hidden and because so few people have any money left to move to the southern hemisphere. It costs you $1 million or two now, I think, to buy your way in to Australia and New Zealand. So you can't just show up unless you're on this very short list of qualified skills or you have a lot of money. And I don't know about you, but I don't fall in either one of those categories.
Well, I think the what would counter that a little bit is the people who act early. My wife is Brazilian, so that helps. That sort of puts me in there at a pretty good level.
Yeah, so you married. Congratulations.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good thing. So
yes, I think there are many people who are interested in making that move, who understand that there will be habitat for humans longer in the southern hemisphere than the northern hemisphere. They're rapidly falling apart on the economic front in the northern hemisphere, and it doesn't really matter whether you look at Japan or China or the United States or Europe. The whole house of cards is coming down, and so yes, it makes a lot of sense to move south, and I would suggest as far south as possible.
So I really like to end things like this on a positive note, but I think this in particular, it's really difficult to end this on a positive note. But just to be real, what would you suggest is, okay, I'm going to open this up. Here's what I think. I think there's only three things that could really help us out here. One is, if there is a God, which I have my doubts, but let's say there is a God that's all of a sudden going to be empathetic to our situation, intervene, and change everything around instead of drowning us all like he did in the Old Testament. That would be one solution. I'm not putting much faith in that. The other solution would be, if there is such a thing as a shift of consciousness, a collective conscious shift that could take us as a planetary being to a level to where our consciousness could actually interact and start manifesting a new world, even right down to changing the weather. That would be one. And that's where it comes in, where we're treating people better, we're treating ourselves better, and starting to be in the moment to feed that conscious evolution. But the other one, and it's one I very seldom bring up because it tends to undermine the credibility of everything that we talk about. But if you really look at the facts, I mean, there's 2- and 3-star generals that are speaking up, and several people in NASA are speaking up, and all of the evidence from the information being released from the government is telling us, even down to some of the Snowden papers, that extraterrestrials have been on this planet and are on this planet and are interacting with us. And that would also be another solution if an advanced being would actually intervene into this. But other than those three things, I'm not sure we have any hope except just to ride this out and see where it takes us.
Well, and I think the first and third of those are the same thing, God or aliens or some sort of intervention beyond the normal or rational path.
Right.
I think those are extra normal or paranormal phenomena that you're invoking. And so when people approach me with those ideas, if it's an alien, I turn to them and I say, so pretend I'm the alien and you tell me why you're worth saving.
Yeah.
Or if it's somebody who's invoking God, I say, do you think he's going to be pretty impressed with what we've done with the place so far? Again, are we really worthy, given what civilization has driven us to do? I would argue that we have not shown ourselves worthy of intervention from the paranormal phenomena to quote, step in and save us. The middle of those, the change in consciousness, I think it's too late given the myriad self-reinforcing feedback loops we've triggered. But that said, when people ask me where they should move in light of climate change information, I give them two answers. I say if you mean geographically or physically, then I would move as far south as possible, short of Antarctica. And if you're talking more generally about where you should move and where you should spend your time, I think you should move inside. Look in your heart. Move there. Become a decent human being instead of a conquistador. And no matter how many days you have left, act as if the moments matter and try to create the moments that matter. And so I think, again, even if all the information I cite is wrong, even if all the science is wrong, all the models and all the projections are wrong, even if that's just a liberal Al Gore inspired conspiracy, that it's still not a bad idea to move inside yourself and spend some time getting to know yourself and then live here now.
Yeah, actually, this information is a great catalyst for moving inside. At this point in my life, I think my main impulse is to focus on the now, be in the moment, be as conscious as possible, and try to keep it in mind that the day will come when I will let out my last breath, and I want to be as conscious as possible when I do that, for whatever that transition is, to maintain that continuum of consciousness through that process. But to do that requires me to be as conscious as possible now and treat everybody like I would like them to treat me, and to simply be in the moment. And I guess this is why I'd like to probably end up moving south, to have a little more time and to be able to watch this process unfold without being involved in so much of the chaos, because the chaos can really pull your energy down, your consciousness, right down into the very roots of survival.
Yes, living as a conscious, aware human being, I think, is a far more not only promising but rewarding approach than not. So even, I mean, I'm not suggesting awareness is some sort of nirvana. Awareness, as nearly as I can tell, is hell. It's more a curse than a promise of anything.
Yeah.
But still, I think that knowing is better than not knowing, at least for me, and that's why I go around and tell people this dire news.
This is why they say ignorance is bliss.
Right, yes. and why so many people prefer it.
Yeah.
And why I'm constantly called into question about why I'm telling people this anyway. Because obviously ignorance is the preferred route.
Yep, that's absolutely for sure. Was there anything that you'd like to say to wrap this up on whatever comes to mind, Guy?
I think we really hit all the high points. Somebody asked me after a presentation within the last couple of months if I could summarize this 45-minute presentation I'd just given in 3 sentences. And I thought about that for a minute, and I said, how about 3 words? Live here now. Or if you want 3 sentences, live now, live here now.
Yeah.
And I just can't, I'm not Buddhist. I've been accused of having Buddhist tendencies because of saying things like that. And I don't think that's a wrong approach, no matter what the outcome, no matter where we're headed as a civilization and as a species.
Well, I'm sure you've been accused of worse things.
Oh, many,
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, I really appreciate your time and all of the effort that you're putting into this. I don't know exactly how you do this. I know why. That's easy to figure out. But how you do this, when I talk to my friend Dane up in Mount Shasta, he is into this 24/7. But it's a passionate drive with him to get this information out there, and it does have an effect. And I'm glad to see that you obviously take out time to be here now with your family and enjoy the moment, because at the end of the day, that might be what the whole value of this is.
Well, right, and so that's what I do. This is how I spend my days, is with the people around me that I love, and the other organisms, the non-human organisms around me that I love. And that's why a primary reason I live here, right next to an enormous wilderness area. And then the other thing I do is work to inform people about what I consider a pretty important matter. And I can't stop doing that. I tried for a couple of years when I left active service at the university. I tried to stop my inner teacher, but I couldn't. It's not what I do, it's who I am.
Be it a curse or a blessing, huh?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to let you get back to your family, your day, and your life. And I really appreciate it very much, this interview.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, you had a lot of good things to say that I was hoping you would say about the Southern Hemisphere, too, because that's where I'm headed. So,
Well, congratulations and good luck.
all right.